Life Audio.
Hi, my name is Jeff King. I'm the president of persecution.org and one of the world's leading experts on religious freedom. I focus on spiritual growth, religious freedom, and persecution around the globe. You're listening to Faith Under Fire. I'm Jeff King, the president of International Christian Concern, or persecution.org, and where we define, deepen, and defend your faith. Today, we have Lauren Green. Lauren is the chief religion correspondent for Fox News, and she runs the podcast Lighthouse Faith, has had just wonderful career, fascinating collection of guests on her podcast. I've been a guest on her show. I was so impressed. I thought, Lauren, we've got to get you on mine. So thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. This is so funny that being the opposite of what I'm normally doing on podcasts. So this is very interesting. So I feel like a guest now. Well, I am a guest now. But
you are.
What is he going to ask me kind of thing?
I saw that. Yeah. I know when I asked you, you're like, wait a minute. I don't normally do this. So we're going to have a good time and deal with some deep stuff and interesting stuff and stuff you're very familiar with. So first off, tell us your story. How did you get to, what was the beginning of Lauren's life and how did you get here? Give us the background.
Well, I'm from Minnesota. I'm born and raised in Minnesota, which just means I like the cold and I like mosquitoes because it's the only two things, really they're famous for if from Minnesota. So yeah. Anyway, and I'm the youngest of five kids and wow. And that was the day. And I'm aging myself because when I was born, the doctors wouldn't tie a woman's tubes unless she had 5 children.
No.
Right. So I was the 5th one.
Wow.
And my mom says, I am up.
I'm done.
I'm done. But it's just, I'm from Minnesota. I have a degree. My first degree is actually in piano performance. I'm a piano major and my dream was to be a concert pianist and I still play. Actually released a CD a few years ago. Actually,
good training, by the way, even for what you're doing right now.
Well, absolutely. Music is such a great background. And in fact, when I started in journalism and I went to graduate school at Medill to get master's in journalism, it was a most frustrating thing for me because it was like I was trying to translate from one language to another. I knew what I wanted to say. I knew the feeling. I knew the nuance of what I wanted to impart to in my writing, but I didn't have the words. I didn't have the ability to kind of translate. So it's funny to explain it that way, but music is a language. It's just Absolutely. Not with words. So it's been a real challenge, but there are some similarities in terms of rhythm in writing. Is it the right rhythm? Is it the right collection of words? Is it too wordy? Is it too less?
Grabbing attention.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Liszt talked about Wagner saying, some good moments and some really need some editing. He's kind of talking about things. So editing is really a huge kind of part of writing and rewriting and learning to write. And you never are there. It's always a new kind of challenge. And I am so incredibly blessed to have incredible producers and young writers and old writers, but, new writers who understand, who don't understand, who say, I don't understand this. So can you say it another way? And I said, okay, you don't understand. That means maybe I should say another way.
That's great.
So it's really a collaborative thing, but I learned to write much the way I learned to play the piano, one step at a time. So I went from Minnesota. I have a degree in piano from the University of Minnesota. I have a graduate degree from Medill in from Northwestern in Chicago. In journalism. And I started working in Minneapolis and then worked a little bit in Chicago and then came here to work for Fox News Channel. I've been working here since the very beginning of Fox, they started in 1996. Mm-hmm. And it is now 2025. Oh my goodness, we're like 29 years.
Oh my God.
We're getting close to 30 years. Yes, I started when I was 15.
Wow.
So it's been a long time, and I really began as really a general kind of reporter, anchor, but I always had an interest in faith because of the music background. When you learn the history of music, you really learn the history of the Catholic Church. And because I was Protestant, I didn't understand a lot of the things that were going on because I didn't understand that history. So, but I always was close to faith. My great aunt Retha, who I talk about in my book, Lighthouse Faith, really was a woman of faith. She taught Sunday school. She understood faith from the standpoint of living it, not just understanding it, not intellectualizing it, but understanding it and living it out. And I began to really have this hunger to know God. And probably midway through, maybe a few years into being here, I just started going to Redeemer Presbyterian, which is Tim Keller's church. And it just took me on a whole nother level. It just took me to a different level of understanding this faith. And, it wasn't, when he mentioned a book in a sermon or 2 or 3 books, I would go get those books. Yeah. I would read those books. And one of the books that really, really was a big influence was J.I. Packer's Knowing God. And it hit me from that point of view that there was nothing more important in life than knowing God. Yeah. Any theologian worth his or her salt will tell you that. If you want to know who you are, then you better know who God is, because he made you. And that's the only way you're going to find out. Yeah. So, yeah.
And what an excellent place to be discipled, because Tim Keller, of all people, is in New York City. Yeah. So he is in the belly of the secular environment, and very tuned in, very bright, and constantly thinking. He has an outreach mentality, but he's very bright. Yes. So he speaks to all levels of society, but he's very intellectual, but so wisely sensitive, but so deep and core. His faith was very core and dead on. He was an amazing man.
I'll tell you, one of the things, I was actually going to Fifth Avenue Presbyterian, which is a very nice church. Yeah. And then for some reason, I happened to sit next to a guy who had been kind of going to both churches. And he says, "Oh, I really love this Tim Keller." And I said, yeah, fine. I like my church. I'm fine. Very next week, he came with a CD of Tim Keller's sermon. And honest to goodness, I listened to it 3 times in a row. I said, it blew me away. I went, this is different. This is totally different. And so it was his influence that helped me understand a certain understanding of the 10 Commandments, of the Bible. And that's really where I got the idea for the first book, which is the Lighthouse Faith book. Yeah. That just really steeps you into this understanding of, if God is God and if God is sovereign, then there is this imprint of God in everything and everyone. Yeah. And you can't escape it. And that's why I understood it best in music. I could see it in music the way it was working in music, down to the very notations and the overtone series and all of the, I could see it working. Then I started to look at other disciplines like architecture, like agriculture, of course, because, agriculture, it's all through the Bible. The seed and you growing the seed, but it's from a level that, and how we grow, and just, it was just incredibly impactful. And that's why I keep saying there's just nothing more important in life than knowing God. It's just nothing more important.
Amen. So, and by the way, forgive me because I didn't mention you as an author and the book. So anything else? Tell us, I think you kind of generally gave it to us, but what else would you say about the book?
The book, if I could explain it, it was based on one of Tim Keller's sermons about the 10 Commandments, which is a totally different understanding that I understood. Most people grow up in Sunday school and understand the 10 Commandments from the standpoint of, these are rules and regulations laid down by sovereign God. Yes, do not do this, do this, do this, whatever. But he explained it in a way that the first commandment is key, and all the other commandments basically have to bow down to it, right? You can't violate commandments 2 through 10 unless you first violate number 1. So what's that telling you? And from a scientific point of view and from a music point of view, that tells me something about, because I related it in terms of the major scale, the keynote. Wow. Everything is relating to the keynote in the harmony of a piece, right? It's all about the relationship with the keynote and how harmony is set up. So all of a sudden, now I'm understanding it as a closed system. You can't violate, commandments 2 through 10 without first violating 1, which means everything is related first to the first commandment and second by its relationship to everything else. That became And what blew me away in terms of music is that the major scale and the harmonic system is not something that man created. They ordered it based on the harmonic series that's already in the vibrating nature of music.
Yeah.
And that just totally blew my mind, that God's imprint was simply on everything. And the fact that in the Bible, we are commanded to make music to God more than 200 times in the book of Psalms.
That's right.
What does that tell you?
Yeah.
There's something about music. There's something about this God. He has his hand in everything. There's nothing in this world that God's imprint is not on. And that's why it just blows me away in terms of understanding who this God is. I mean, it's about, it's about how you live your life, how you treat people, your morality, your sexuality, your money. All of these things are things that you have to give over to God. I'll tell you one thing that impressed me about Tim Keller when I first started going to the church. Here you are in New York City, right? Probably the most secular place in the world. Church is young, mostly under 35-year-olds, right? This is a man who had the guts and the intellect to preach against premarital sex.
Yes.
In New York.
Can you imagine?
A group of under 35-year-olds.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa.
Yep.
Whoa.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, oh my gosh, he's preaching to me and I'm supposed to have this guilt. It was more like, oh my God, I could have had a V8. I mean, it was just like, oh my God.
It's revelatory, yeah.
Why didn't somebody tell me this, 30 years ago?
Yeah.
It would have had a totally different life.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think a lot of people would have had a totally different life, stronger marriages, totally different kinds of marriages.
A whole lot less
understanding
brokenness.
who they are and understanding who this God is and understanding, what is the meaning of marriage? What is the meaning of marriage? It is this, it's gospel discipleship in a minute form. That's what it is from a Christian standpoint. Now, society has made it something different, of course, which is why we have the problem of marriage we have today. But I mean, it's just, I mean, reading the Bible every day, reading devotionals every day, praying every day. I need to work on the praying every day because that's something, it's like time and everything. But, it's to being close to God is the most comforting part of your life.
That's right.
It's just nothing else. I laugh when I hear, people in media, well, we have to be on the right side of history. It's like, no, I have to be on the right side of eternity. That's much better.
Oh, that's good.
Better bet there.
That's good. Hey, so you kind of operate in two worlds. There's the podcast, there's Fox News, Religion Correspondent, huge overlap. What motivates you? And I think we're hearing some of it, but what motivates you? What are the most interesting topics you delve into?
I think that what I like to do is look at topics obviously that are religious based, but not all things are religious based in a sense, not directly linked.
Yeah.
But I like theological ideas. I like academic things. I like things that affect a lot of people. But theologically, I think it's really important to understand this relationship between the world and God. And I love science. I love Dr. Michael Gillen, who was on talking about, he was an atheist who became a Christian because he just looked at, he looked at the Gospels and saw quantum physics. He's like, oh my goodness. Yep. Like J. Warner Wallace, who, I don't know if you know who he is. He was a former cold case detective, who's an atheist, also used his forensic skills of investigating murders where there was no body. And as an atheist, used his forensic skills to try to debunk Christianity and then came away a believer. He says, oh my gosh, because he looked at the four Gospels and what he saw were 4 different eyewitness accounts of the same event. Yep. Now, a cold case detective would have seen that, right? Yeah. If you would have seen 4 Gospels and everybody saying the same thing, it's not true. But he saw, from a cold case detective perspective, that's what he saw. And then Dr. Hugo Ross, who is another scientist who was an atheist, and he read all the creation stories of all the different religions to try to debunk everything. And he got to the creation story in Genesis, which a lot of people just kind of poo-poo. He goes, from a scientific point of view, the book of Genesis is the only creation story that gets the sequence right of what science understands the creation of the world. Because how could somebody write this, thousands of years ago and get it right?
Yeah.
Right?
In the beginning, there was chaos, and then there was light. Yeah.
Right. He saw that from a perspective of science. We get a lot of people in the modern age get bogged down into, well, how did he do it? Well, how did he do it? And the Bible is much more concerned about the why than the how, but it's going to show you the how in a way that's true to the scriptures, that's true to reality. And that's what that Hugo Ross saw. And I think that's what the Bible always does. If you're open to it, it always speaks to you in the area where you know it's speaking to you. Like, it spoke to me through music. It spoke to J. Warner Wallace through his forensic skills. It spoke to Dr. Michael Gillen through his physicist skills. I mean, when you actually are looking at your discipline and see something in the Bible, that's God speaking to you in the language you would understand it. If God is sovereign and has his hands on everything and every part of creation, he's going to be able to speak to you wherever you are.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Real broad question. This is going to lead us down all kinds of avenues. But you've been in the media game for a long time, and you're a thinker, and you're an observer of culture. Then, if you're in media, you're an observer of culture. Talk about what's happened, because many people, I talk to my kids about this a lot. It's kind of your perspective is so governed by where you drop into the story of your culture, country, world. And, I always relate it back to when they play video games. When you play the video game a long time, things become so obvious, and then the game slows down, and it's so much easier to discern what's going on. So it's hard for those who haven't played the game a long time. Let's talk about what has happened to the perception of Christians in Western culture and even in our country. What's happened there? What's been driving that?
Well, the spiritual answer to that is Satan. It's the devil, and it's just very easy to go there. But I do think that we have to understand that so much of the problems that we have in the world really is in us. The sin is in us. This is Alexander Solzhenitsyn's famous quote about, if there were just evil people, we could just put evil people over here, it would all be good. But the problem with evil, it cuts through the heart of every human being, and who wants to destroy his own heart?
That's right.
This is the problems of what's going on in the world. That being said, you've got a split within Christianity in the Western world between the liberal Christian and the conservative Christian. I mean, that's the only way I can describe it right now, because that's what people understand. But the line that is being drawn, and unfortunately, nobody's really kind of saying it. The line that's being drawn really is on sexuality, about gender and ideology. This wasn't the same thing as abortion. Abortion had its problems too, and its conflicts. Whether a woman should have the right to abort her child, or to abort, or to have the right to do with her body what she wanted. And I have a sidebar on that. It's like, from a Christian perspective, you really don't, because your body is bought and paid for by the blood of Jesus Christ. So you don't have that ability. That's it. Christian can't make that excuse. And
there's a separate life. Yeah.
Right. It's a separate. But that being said, we'll just go back to the issue of what's really splitting Christianity. It is gender. It is the LGBTQ rights. You saw this with the president and at the National Prayer Service yesterday, where I don't know if you watched it, but the bishop talked about, they talked right to the president, asking him to be more compassionate about LGBTQ and transgender people. And it's like, whoa, I know that's not going to sit well with the president. And you could tell from the cutaway. I just saw the cutaway this morning where, the president and J.D. Vance were like looking at each other, go, no.
Who invited this guy?
Yeah, exactly. And it was a woman, and this is the Episcopal Church, and I was actually surprised that he was ending this prayer service at the Episcopal Church, because as we watch what happens in the Episcopal Church, we know that they are they're very liberal. It's they are that close to just sanctifying marriage between a man and a man and a woman and a woman. I mean, they're this is the way the Episcopal Church is. And the reason why the National Cathedral is part of the Episcopal Church, and because it, first of all, took decades to build, but also because the history of politicians in America has been very well saturated with Episcopalians. The reason being is because the Episcopal Church is, is basically the American version of the Church of England. So as we understand that America grew out of, people coming from England, they were from the Church of England and of course became Episcopalians, which is why so many of the politicians and the landowners originally, because they were, part of the Church of England, are Episcopalian. So this is the tradition, but the Episcopal Church is kind of going like that, or that to the left, and over this issue of gender and sexuality. And it's not just the Episcopal Church; it's mainline Protestantism in itself. You've got the Methodist Church splitting. It has a conservative wing and now a liberal wing. You've got that having the United Methodists. They were the last to really officially do it, but the Presbyterians are the same way. There is the PCUSA and then the PCA, and they're very different churches in terms of theologically of what they look at in sexuality. And of course, you've got the Lutheran Church as well doing the same thing. So you've got that happening within the Christian Church, and it's really over the issue of sexuality and gender identity. That's really calling the line. I mean, you can kind of bring in the sidebars of immigration, and then that's just coming in on the coattails, But it's so. Who was it? Who just wrote the book Shepherds for Sale? I forgot her name. She wrote a book about the influence of liberal money in churches that really are holding up a lot of these kinds of ideas.
Yeah.
Where you saw it before the election is in this sort of attack, or I'm going to say attack, but this I guess attack is the only way I can word it, on something called Christian nationalism. And Christian nationalism was something that it wasn't a club, it wasn't a denomination, it wasn't anything but something that the left created.
That's right.
In order to demonize people who loved God and loved their country.
Yeah.
And basically that's what it was. And so there was this boogeyman created before the election called Christian nationalism. We must fight Christian nationalism. And that's kind of what happened, because that was another way to fight against Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I just, and that's the only way I can explain it. I mean, I had I forgot his name, I'm forgetting so much this morning.
You've had a lot of guests, yeah.
Yeah, pastor, somebody on with, Alex McFarland, who was basically a Christian nationalist. And I had them both on to talk to each other.
That's fascinating.
We just talk about this.
Yeah.
I mean, why would... And so they really did try. And I actually had the same person on with Ryan Baumberger to talk about things. I said, because my feeling is people have to talk to each other, because it's the only... If they have a venue, a platform, or a place to talk to each other rather than talk at each other, it'll be better. We've got a lot of media out there that is really geared towards one side or the other, but very few times do they actually talk to each other.
Absolutely.
And it was just, I'll tell you, I told the producer afterwards, I said, I just have agita right now, because it was just so stressful of having people who really have opposing views try to talk it out, try to be kind, but it's like, no, white and black. I mean, we got to love each other, but we got to talk through this, because this is what's happening to the Christian church. You're being split over this issue. This is not an issue that you can compromise on. This is not like, I believe in evolution or I believe in creation. all right, there's something part of each one of those that kind of works with us, and science has kind of proved that, it's kind of working together there. This is not one of those issues. The Bible's been very clear about who's going to inherit the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And so, this is messy stuff. And I thought, we got to talk about this. And what we saw last night, or yesterday with the president at the prayer service was like, you're just seeing what I see all the time.
That's right.
You are just witnessing what is going on all the time. And yeah.
Yeah. So fantastic point on the Christian nationalism. And I would say, though, the population had to be softened up prior to that for that thing to even work.
Oh, yeah. You're so right.
Right? So if we go back, and tell me if this resonates, but I go back to the 80s, and two things really, there were sea changes, and one was the moral majority. So that was Christianity linked with politics. So then we got branded, and you're like, oh, you want to enter this realm? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Christians had been out of the political scene, really, since the Scopes trial, really. They punted, and they just said, it's a dirty business, it's worldly, we don't want a part of that. And then what do you get? If you're not going to be involved in democracy, what are you going to get? You're going to get secular people or those who hate the church ruling over you. So anyways, moral majority rises up, Jerry Falwell, and he says, look, there is a moral majority out there. And this first of all branded Christians with a political brand, but also it really got under the hide of extreme liberal Hollywood. And they said, you want to go? Let's go. And that started, in my mind, a decade-long propaganda effort. So you look at the past of how Christians were portrayed in media and movies.
Oh, yeah.
And then look what's happened.
Oh.
So then the populace gets softened up. Now, along with that, there was the Catholic Church and the pedophile scandal, the mishandling of the pedophile scandal. Disastrous. You look at that and you're like, and it doesn't matter if you're Catholic or evangelical, because I've talked to, like you, plenty of deep Catholics that are like, oh gosh. So those two things, that was just fodder for anybody who already hates the church. You're like, they say that's what Christianity is. But then I think that really then what we were seeing in movies were these characters that were absolutely horrific and despicable that were Christian. And it's really dramatic. Does that resonate?
Yeah, it totally does. And I really love the way you were saying we've been softened up, right? Because, when I was growing up and kind of in that mid, 1900, whatever century, 20th century, we sort of breathed the air of Christianity. We were it was in the culture. We said Christmas Vacation. We said Easter Vacation. If you watch the original Parent Trap movie with, Haley Mills. Yeah. They talk about, I'll send her there for Easter. Well, I'll send her back for Christmas. It was just a total understanding of how this worked. And of course, Disney was very, very reverential towards faith. You get what you've got. And so this is one of the issues. There were a couple of things that went on in the 50s and 60s is that the mainline Protestant churches were basically taking the miracle, the spiritual elements of Christianity out of Christianity.
Yeah. Yep.
They couldn't believe in a virgin birth, or it's just treating people nicely. If all it is treating people nicely, you might as well just join the Elks Club. There's just no difference. So there was just this element of taking the real divine spiritual nature and the past and the mystery out of Christianity. The Catholic abuse thing, of course, didn't help. And one of the things you'll see constantly with any kind of story today about the Catholic abuse things is all the cases that they're really talking about are cases that happened, 40 and 50 years ago. They're not talking about cases that are happening now. I mean, the Catholic Church has done more to mitigate and to eradicate the abuse that happens within the church. And one of the things, again, that the John Jay study actually revealed was that 60%, and got to look this up, but I believe it's 60% of those cases at least had to do with they weren't pedophilia, they were homosexuality. That it was a priest who was actually attracted to boys who post-adolescent. Now, if you've got 60% of anything in a situation that's causing this, you address it, right? But the media didn't want to look at that. They wanted to look at pedophile priests.
Yes.
Well, the definition of pedophile is that it's pre-adolescent.
Yes.
But the 60% or more of these cases were actually with adolescents.
Yeah, it was homosexual abuse, but they wouldn't name it. Yeah.
They wouldn't name it. And this is one of the issues. Well, this is why I say the sin is in us. We have our sacred cows. We don't want to go there. We don't want to expose this, but it's much easier to blame Christianity. To blame, people who blame Christianity really don't understand the gospel. They look at Christians and they don't look at the gospel. And unfortunately, Christians are not the best acting of all people. They're just as sinful as everybody else.
We make very poor ambassadors.
Right, exactly. And so, it's like I always say, the church is like a hospital. It's for the sick. It's not for the healthy.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a lot of sinful people in a church who may or may not admit their sins. So that's one of the things that this is the problem with, and media and Hollywood in particular has been very heavy-handed in how they deal with today with Christianity, with faith. If you notice, I totally love crime shows. I love it. Law and Order SVU. I love Castle. I love Law and Order. I really do love them all. I just think it's really fascinating. And Blacklist, and it's like, but the minute they start talking about faith, they just don't even understand. And I tell my husband this. I says it's not that there aren't sinful people and really bad people within the church, but for most audiences, for the bulk of their audiences, they will never know the difference. They will never know the real gospel because they're not presenting that.
That's right.
And so that's, to me, they're doing the devil's due. They're doing the devil's work by presenting the gospel of Jesus Christ in a way that's so negative, that's so, repulsive.
It just cordons people off. It cordons the masses off from the faith. They won't go through the gate. Yeah, they won't even explore.
Right. Which is really, it hurts people because you're not being exposed to the gospel.
Yeah.
And if this is the truth, if Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior, if he is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through him, then what you're doing by that is sentencing people to a life in hell, separate from God.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it's the devil's work.
Yeah.
And it may sound a little, woo out there, but if this is the truth, if Jesus is who he says he is, objectively, not because you believe in him, but objectively, this is who he says he is, it changes everything.
Changes
everything. He can't just be, because of what he says about himself, he can't just be a teacher of love and an example, right? The gospel means good news. It doesn't mean a good example. You don't say, oh, by the way, what Tim Keller said, he said, oh, by the way, a penny saved is a penny earned. It's just good advice. Just get out there and give some good advice. That's what the gospel's. No, it's good news of what has been done for us, of what has been done. The course correction that happened 2,000 years ago, that is what has been done. And now, 2,000 years later, we're in this really wonderful sweet spot where we understand science. We understand the gospel better than we've ever understood it before. And now we have this obligation to go forward and spread this message in a way that really understand it.
Yeah, the dead and dying are all around us, and we have the life preserver. It's not us. It's what was thrown to us.
Yes.
And we have an obligation to reach out to others. They're all around us. But instead, we're so cowed into a corner. We're so frightened. So you think of that softening up and that propaganda and what that's done. And that cordoning off. And so then what you're left with, you already named it, I say this all the time, it's like so much of modern Christianity has devolved into being nice. Your job is be nice, and you sit in the corner. Don't come in the public square. We'll talk more about that. but you sit over there and be nice. And if you transgress those boundaries, we're gonna come after you.
Well, that is the whole point. That's why the politics gets ugly, because a lot of it under even Barack Obama, and default, I think, Joe Biden, because he's one of those cradle Catholics that kind of went along with that. But Barack Obama was trying to sort of peddle this understanding of faith on the sense of keeping it private, right?
Yeah.
You can worship who you want to worship, but just keep it private.
Get out of the public.
No, that's not the way it works.
Nope.
That's not how even faith works. I mean, we just take one example of one thing, just in terms of even marriage. It's like, you can't tell me that there are more than two genders because I can't go along with that. My faith won't allow that. Who asked me to keep it private? There is no private space for faith. It's always going to be public. There is no neutral position when it comes to faith. And secular people try to make you believe that, but there is nothing. There's no neutral. You're worshiping something. You're just going to worship something. That's the way we're built.
Yeah.
It matters. It's like people. I love these studies or these polls that say how many people believe in God today. Well, maybe people believe. It's like, question is not how many people believe in God. The devil believes in God.
That's right.
There's no question for the devil that there is a God. It's a question of what are you worshiping. That's a more probing question, because the devil won't worship God.
That's right.
What
That's
are you?
Yeah.
So,
so we find ourselves in this context. You've got two great positions, two viewpoints, looking from the podcast and as a religion correspondent, having been with Fox for forever. So what are you seeing? Sorry, that's okay.
It's okay.
That's respect. That's like, you've had a long career, so you've got a lot of wisdom and you've seen a lot. So what are the nature of the cases? What are the big cases you've seen? What are interesting guests you've had that really hone in on the subject where people are being targeted for their Christianity? What are you seeing out there?
One of the biggest cases, we talked about this on my podcast, is Päivi Räsänen, who is the member of parliament in Finland, who has been under legal persecution for her faith. And when I talked about how the LGBTQ issues are now really the things that are dividing, that her life is an example of this. I mean, she's being prosecuted for releasing a
private
pamphlet,
tweet.
A pamphlet or a tweet about why her Lutheran Church is supporting the Pride Parade, because she said this is what the Bible says. Well, they targeted for hate speech, and they tried to break her down. I think she's been through 2 trials already. I think they won't let it go. They just simply won't let it go. And I try to raise this more and more, because every trial is like, one of the things that happened in our trial, though, which I thought was very, very, it showed a blaring example of what happens when you're not raised or when you don't understand the gospel, right? One of the things that the gospel preaches is that we are much more sinful than we could ever imagine. You just don't know the depths of our sin, because civil society kind of keeps us on the rails, but we just don't know what we're capable of. But that we are more loved than you could ever believe. This is the gospel.
Yeah.
And what she was saying on the trial and on the stand as she was testifying is that you can separate someone's sin from who they are. You are still loved, even though I can love you but not love the sin, right? Love the sinner but not the sin. And the prosecuting attorney simply didn't understand that. Didn't understand the concept of saying that. And her reaction was, no, you've got to love the whole person. Well, when she said that, basically she was saying that that's a sin, but I don't think she understood that was what she was saying. But when you don't understand the gospel, this is how your mind works. You don't understand that people sin, but you can still love them, right? You can still love them. And I think that's where secular kind of society doesn't get and doesn't understand.
Yeah.
The Jack Phillips case of the baker, Jack Phillips out in Colorado, they're still after him. They don't want you to have these ideas, and anybody who has them is now, they're trying to trying to remove from society or get education, to realign your thinking. This is because you shouldn't have these ideas. And so they talk about fascism on the right. Fascism they equate with race. Like, no, there's a fascism on the left too. It
seems like that's the center. It's just the intolerance. It's unbelievable.
It's the intolerance of saying, if you think like this, if you believe this, you can't participate in society.
That's right.
And I think that's where...
That's Marxism at its core, really.
Exactly. That it is. And so...
control, big brother.
Right. Yeah. Right. I think that's the problem with the mainline Protestantism, is that they see that they're part and parcel of that.
Yeah.
They don't see that at all. And so that's why this whole idea that created this sort of Christian nationalism became this more popular thing. That's the problem, and Biden saying that, white nationalism or white supremacy is the biggest problem, whereas and other watchdog groups know, no, radical Islam probably is a great deal more of a threat than white supremacists. It's like, I don't even know white supremacists.
I don't know any white supremacists.
No, any white supremacists. It's just the idea that they're all around. It's like,
yes,
you've got, illegal immigration, where you've got, Venezuela just, opens up the prisons. Hey, go to America. They want you, and you've got these people committing crimes. And yet, white supremacy is...
That's the issue.
Problem. Well, you know what it is? It's not just white supremacy that's the problem, right? It's white straight males that have now created the moniker white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
That it's the toxic masculinity. You're the problem because you were the power structure. Mm-hmm. And listen, I can say this because I'm a Black woman.
Yeah.
I see these things.
Yeah.
I have no fear of a straight white male. I have no fear. They are not my problem. They're just people. I say this to people who don't like people. I said, you know what? They're just people. They are just people. And Jesus loves them just as much as he loves you. Remember that.
Yeah.
So,
with the Paivi case, Paivi Rasana, and for those who want to look her up, if you remember, it was so fascinating because we'll put it into our system. So it's the head of the Justice Department comes after her. She makes a private tweet. Head of the Justice Department comes after her. Again, I'm speaking from our perspective.
Yeah.
That's the position of the woman. And first of all, gets the police on her. Go investigate her. The police are scratching their heads, and they don't understand religion, but they're scratching their heads and are like, there's no crime here. And the head prosecutor of the whole country says, yes, there is. We're going after her. So goes to their Supreme Court. Supreme Court throws it out. What does the prosecutor do? Again, and there's been 3 cases. So, and there's a clear lesson there that you've seen over and over. And it's the process is the punishment. Even if there's no laws, we're going to infiltrate the government and use the power of the state to go after our political enemies. Even though it's against democracy, it's against the Constitution, but we're going to go after them and we will torture them. And, to think of the Old South, we'll string them up publicly. We will make an example of them.
Right.
And so everyone gets the message, right? And so we find ourselves, so many Christians just hiding from all these things we talked about, just hiding and keeping their head down in a foxhole. And it's so sad because of really what you already nailed, that we have a deep, deep calling. And if we've been forgiven everything and the dead and dying are all around us, it's like we've got to act differently. And we've got to act in love, of course. But again, that's the transgression now. You could only be nice, but we have to be bold. And we have to say there's a higher calling. And the Lord will protect you. If even if you get fired, whatever, the Lord will protect you. But that's that's who we owe our allegiance to. And we have a debt to rescue the lost. And that means we're going to take hits. Didn't Jesus say that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I was just listening to, Tim Keller, of course, again, a sermon on marriage with his wife, Kathy. And they were talking about the idea of truth and love. And this is why my podcast, I always start out with, we're moving forward in truth and love.
Yeah.
Because truth, because people have different temperaments, some people like to give the truth and truth, and here it is, and and then
they're very insensitive, or vice versa.
Or people, want to be, this is the love, and here's the love. And he says, people don't change without truth and love. If you have truth, they won't change, and it will be just, you're hitting your head up against a wall and you're not being very loving. If you just love, then they won't change. You're just affirming a lot of their bad choices, and that's not really what really should happen. So only truth and love combined can really make a difference. And if you read about how Jesus encounters people, he never shirks on the truth, but is always loving. And we are called to be like that. And it's hard. How do you present an argument that's both truth and it contains both truth and love? And I think Päivi Räsänen really did. She was trying to, but that just landed on deaf ears. The whole idea about you can't separate the sin from the sinner.
That's right.
It's really a difficult thing to do. And listen, if you're married, it's a hard thing to do. You just want to, husband does something wrong, you just want to give him the lecture on what he did wrong and how he did it wrong. And
I don't know what you're talking about, but you go ahead here. You're on some crazy rant. You just keep going.
There's truth and there's love. And a lot of people will be, just an example of a movie, and it just got me like, why did you go there? It was George Clooney produced this movie, The Boys in the Boat, about, I think it was 1938. I think it was 1938 or 1936. Road team out of Washington.
Okay.
I think it was Washington, or was it Oregon, or was it Washington anyway? It was just a wonderful movie. But the one reference to faith was when the young girl said to the boy who was in the road team, and something about my mother only has a Bible when she's shaking it at me, or something like that. I'm like, why'd you go there?
Of course.
You got to waste all that time. You could have just left that out, right? But the one dig you want to make is about faith, right? About the scriptures. And I just thought that was so unnecessary, but it's like his little dig at Christians and at the Bible. And I just like, you got to go there. I mean, you're cutting a lot of stuff out, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Why didn't you cut that out? Why'd you leave that one in?
Yeah. And of course, with a movie, everything, that's what people, I think, don't realize. If you're writing a book, if you're writing a music script, whatever, if you're talented, you're thinking about every little passage, every little note, and it's all thought out and it's strategic, and you're putting it in there for a reason.
Yes.
And that's almost innocuous compared to some of what you see, but it's so much of this. You just see it constantly, constant digs. Christians are bigoted, they're hateful, blah, blah, blah.
And I can't imagine in 1936, a road team and that kind of people would not be more reverential towards faith.
That's right.
Because that's the era you're dealing with.
That's
right. He left it out totally in terms of having any kind of reverence for it at all. The only reference he had for it was something negative.
Well, listen, we're going to close out. I've got to get you back on. There are so many questions I have for you, but and it's interesting because when I was on your show and listening to you and I watch your podcast and I'm like, I just resonate so much with you. And now that we're discussing, I get why. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's same references, all kinds of things, just the same worldview. So, and Tim Keller fan. So you're more than a fan. Went there. So I'm going to give you the mic and you could just talk to Christians out there. What do they need to hear today? What would be your speech?
That the God who created this world, who created the universe, who created everything in it, loves you. Loves you like you have never been loved before.
Yeah.
And tap into it. Wherever you do, whatever your discipline is, you can do that to the glory of God. You can do that to God's glory. Look at what you're doing. Understand that this God loves you more than you ever can imagine. That no spouse, no human being, no, new house, new this, new purse, new right, can substitute for this love of God. This God who loves you. Put your effort into finding out who this God is. Change your life in ways you can never imagine. I mean, it will simply make you a more content person, a more loving person, a more forgiving person. Just know that this God who created everything also created you and loves you and knows you better than anybody, any being in all creation. And just live like that.
That's excellent. I said I was going to give you the last mic, but I think I lied because what you just said just struck something. It struck a chord inside. So I'm just going to echo this or throw this story back to you. But, I didn't grow up as a Christian. I grew up in an atheist, agnostic family. And so long story, but I was in a long search for God, didn't know any Christians, 10, 11 years chasing God, and then I get saved. I get radically saved. I mean, overnight, Holy Spirit on me. So for the first couple months, there was, and I'll probably go to tears when I talk about this. I always do. So be forewarned. So, but God's presence was so strong, and I had such an intimate relation and view. He would reveal himself, and what I saw and what I felt was this overwhelming love. And to the point I had to say, you have to back off. I'm going to explode. Wow. I don't know how that works, but it's too great a current, right? Wow. So, but with this message, though, of overwhelming love and forgiveness came a commandment. And this was the holiness side. So you really spoke about this love and the holiness. So truth. And he said, and he wanted me to correct a relationship, a long-term relationship. And I had hurt somebody for years and they didn't know the Lord. And he said, I want you to go and ask their forgiveness and tell them about me.
Wow.
And, yeah.
Wow.
So just to echo what you're saying, that's the reality of this is our God. We just can't even imagine. We can't imagine how broke we are, how broken. We can't imagine how much he loves us. We can only see through a mirror dimly right now.
Yeah.
When it becomes real to you, it transforms everything and it orients your life, which you said. Everything orients then around this relationship. And the one who rescues us now and has created a safe home for us, but he has a mission for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has been such a joy. Do you want to, I'll give you anything if you want to say.
No, I want to just agree. And thank you so much for telling me your testimony. It's really very powerful. And thank you so much. Thank you.
And like I said, I've got to get you back on. I have so enjoyed talking to you. I love your perspective and your insights and the music background. Oh my gosh. Just wonderful. So thank you for spending time with us today.
It's my pleasure and my blessing. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Life Audio.